Empath.
What's up? What's up? Another episode of Ripple Effect Podcast. Of course, I'm your host, Ricardo Rendes, also known as Ricky Francis, and a great episode for you today. Today we have somebody who's been on the Union of the Unwanted a bunch of times. He's been on Charlie Robinson's Macroaggressions and many other amazing podcasts that I'm sure you listen to. He is a producer, a musician, filmmaker, and much more. Today we have Jeff Warnock, and we share our personal stories about how music has influenced, inspired, and impacted our lives. We also talk about finding fulfillment and purpose. So I'm sure this type of conversation will connect with many people listening. But before we get into this amazing conversation, let me remind you this is a value for value show. If you get any value out of the discussions and guests I bring to you, please consider giving some value back. It doesn't have to be financial. You can share, review, leave comments, subscribe to us on all the platforms we're on. But if you are in a good financial situation, consider joining our Patreon page and supporting us monthly. You can also send us a one-time donation via Venmo or PayPal. So if you want to send a thank you for the show or a episode you like, you can send a little message with your donation. We also have an amazing merch store. Our merch store is run by Ryan Graham, who is also the host of the Independent Review podcast. He owns an amazing little small family business called Big Frog Merch. He runs my merch store. The quality is phenomenal. The print and the detail in it is amazing and second to none. You get the stuff quickly and you can help support the Ripple Effect podcast and a family-owned merch store, Big Frog Merch. We also have some sponsors, which you can check out in the show description. And we also have Theory 6 Music, which is my solo music project. You can stream that anywhere you can stream music, Pandora, Spotify, iTunes, etc. And that's finally it. Enjoy this amazing conversation, and I'll talk to you guys in the next one. Peace.
Without boring anybody. Yeah, so I grew up on the East Coast about, kind of North Jersey, roughly like 30, 40 miles outside of Manhattan. So I kind of grew up around that New York City culture. It was a lot for me, and ended up going up to school in your neck of the woods. I went to Northeastern in Boston, so spent a lot of good years up there in New England, which was great. And that was kind of where I started to embrace a little bit more of my creative endeavors, I guess. Like growing up, I learned how to play guitar at a pretty early age. I came from a, you know, somewhat musical family, like my from my mom's side. There's a couple generations of people who, they weren't good musicians, but they loved to play music, which I think is arguably way more important. And so most of our holidays were centered around just playing, whatever three chord songs we could figure out how to play poorly. And it was great, and like my parents were fantastic. They were very encouraging of the music thing growing up. I'm looking at a couple of the first pedals they got me. My Boss DS1 distortion, chorus pedal, and like they were very, very encouraging. And but I don't know, it didn't speak to me for a really long time, which I think is it was something that took me a while to sort of wrap my head around. And I wish people were more comfortable with not knowing what their creative gifts are, because it doesn't, I hear it, I'm sure you hear it all the time too. It's like, oh, I'm just like not creative. Oh, I wish I could play music and I wish I could do all this stuff. It's like, well, you can just maybe give it some time. And maybe the thing that you're doing right now, just not the right time for it either. And, come back, try some acid and then try it again. Um, but it was, so when I got up to school in Boston, that's where I started like playing around other musicians too. And obviously we have like, the Berkeley crowd and all that. Like there are some fantastic musicians in that town. And so it encouraged me to sort of just like play music as instead of practicing music. And that's where I got really into the production stuff, like Ableton Live was sort of my like the first thing that's like, oh, this makes a lot of sense. Like this is sort of a way for me to the thing that I hear in my head, this is a way of getting it out because I felt very limited with the color palette that guitar could offer. And it's still like the way I compose and write and think and feel and get like sort of my musical catharsis out is via guitar. But with, the production stuff, that's where I was able to sort of get a fully formed idea out there, albeit very poorly, for a very long time. But it was sort of a way for me to just do things without needing to find a group of guys, like to what we just started talking about. Like it's so hard to find a group of people that are all available to play music on a regular basis together, like having that band practice. So like you have to get really comfortable doing the one man band thing if you want to play music regularly. Um, and and so yeah, then I started, learning some other instruments, the piano and all that, and just to add more colors to the palette. And I was in business school at the time, and I didn't really like want to do anything creative. Like I wanted to do something creative with my life, but I didn't really know how to do that. I thought like I grew up making shitty skate films and dumb videos with my brothers and stuff like that. So it wasn't until like I kind of got further deeper into the marketing stuff that I was like, oh, like you could do some of this stuff professionally without it being in Hollywood or broadcast TV or whatever. And so it's been this kind of long meandering path of seeing how all these random like interests started to come together and coalesce in a way that I could use it, in a creative way professionally without draining my creative tank and still leave some room to play music for me. And so it's without being too rambly, it's sort of been this delicate balance of trying to get all of those things aligned. And it's kind of working. And now I get to do it for the alternative news community and the truth, because like I've ever since I saw the Zeitgeist way back when Netflix still had DVDs, and I've been connecting with James, my uncle. He was invaluable to my truther journey. But I think my biggest takeaway from my journey thus far is like that having a worldview is so important that, especially one that kind of fits together. Like none of these things are isolated, that the way you live your life from like an emotional perspective and a physical perspective and a creative perspective and being open-minded, like all of these things can come together to form a beautiful existence. And I think that's what a lot of people struggle with is like, oh, I have these strongly held beliefs here and these things, and they're all sort of isolated, and I don't want to keep rambling. So let me leave it there for you to jump in.
Well, no, we'll ramble away because typically, if you're not doing it, I'm going to end up doing the rambling. But yeah, the creative thing is interesting. That is something that I get, and I think probably anybody who's creative will hear from friends and family, people close to them, this idea that, oh, I can't be creative, or that I couldn't imagine having a idea in my head and then turning it into a song or turning it into poetry or turning it into whatever art. And I mean, I think it's a system. I say this over and over again, where I think that we strip humans of their creativity at a young age. We tell them to regurgitate information, and there's no money in being creative. There's no money in arts. There's no money in this or in that. And so you get people who potentially could pursue a life of being an artist, and they get kind of pushed into another direction. And then I think as time goes by, you just forget how to be creative, or you lose that talent or skill. And I know I've talked about this a lot on the podcast, so I'll go through it quickly. But there's that study where they had like kindergarten kids and in a class, and they would ask them how many of you are creative or have
Mhm.
big imagination. Everybody would raise their hands, and then they would keep asking kids each grade, so they would just keep going up in a grade, and as they consistently went up in a grade, less and less kids would raise their hands. So it's like, yeah, when you're little, you have that notion, that skill, that imagination, and then little by little, as you get older, I think it gets taken from you, or you're told to not focus so much on that and focus on other things. So I think little by little you end up losing it. But I think, like you said, we all have it. We all have that ability. We all have, I think, even maybe a love for it, for creating something. I mean, even people who I know who aren't like artistic at all, like entrepreneurs, they are creating. They like the process of creating a business, or taking a idea and making it into something real. And so I think we definitely all have that. It's funny that you bring up Zeitgeist, because it really, I mean, from an artist perspective, and somebody like you and I who appreciate the artist's perspective on the project, and then also the truther perspective on the project, like what the message they were trying to get, or Peter Joseph himself was trying to get out there, and then also the artistic manner that he did it, where it had a impact on you. And the first Zeitgeist movie, I mean, the colors, the sounds, the imagery, the music, like everything just fit. And for me, like, it was like impossible to not give somebody the DVD, because I would buy a bunch of them and let people borrow them or whatever, and everybody would have the same type of feedback where they're like, "Wow, dude, that like blew my mind," and then I also think the message was way ahead of its time. I know a lot of people in the truther community. James Corbett and I have had little debates, little conversations about how he didn't like the Zeitgeist films. I think they didn't like the I guess the alternative world that they were proposing,
Yeah.
but I do like the idea that they were getting people to think about alternative worlds, right? Like the fact that the system that we live in now doesn't have to be the only way things have to be, right?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think it, just working backwards from there, like when you, I think the place you're at when you see that film for the first time will determine what your takeaway is from it. I think I had this experience sort of like, I mean, I was younger, probably like 13, 14, somewhere around there when I saw it. And it's like, this is all brand new information to me. Like, whoa. And, I was in third grade when 9/11 happened, like 30 miles away, like my dad worked in one of the towers for most of his life, and like it was very close to me. And then seeing sort of like a perspective like, okay, like we had pieces of the rubble in our middle school, dude. Like we had all of, like, it was the propaganda was so deep, that it just really, it was refreshing to see, like, oh, maybe there is something more to the story than I hadn't considered. And so, like, I think if you're willing to just sort of embrace it on that level where it's like, yeah, maybe there's something else out there. Are you willing to be open-minded and embrace it? Then that, I think, gives you a very good experience with the film. But if you're someone like Corbett, who's just like, you don't get much more prestigious in this world than he is, then I'm sure he has a lot of problems with it. And funny enough, like I went to a Catholic high school, and so I developed a decent relationship with one of my religion teachers while I was going there, and like to the point where I could say, like, hey, have you ever seen this film? Like, I'm curious, I'm genuinely curious to hear what your thoughts are. And you could imagine what his thoughts were, that debunked. But like it was, to me, like the spirituality part of this journey too is so integral to your success and happiness in the grand scheme of it. And so I really liked the way that they, because there are so many topics. Like, how could you pick a few and just jam them into one film? And so, like, looking back on it from my perspective now, where it's like, you kind of have like this awakening moment in your life, and then you realize that like the money is fake, and then all these other control systems exist, and then, but that doesn't mean that there isn't value in the world, that you shouldn't have like that there isn't like real money, even if it's not fiat, there isn't real spirituality, even if it's not religion. Like it's there's a lot to go off of. And I think, without having ever spoken to the filmmaker, knowing like that's, so it was important to me at that moment where it's like, now go off and do something with this and figure out what is the truth of it all, or don't. And just, the red pill, blue pill sort of thing, even, overplayed as it may be, it's yeah, I couldn't recommend it enough for people, know, with flaws and all in the story. But like back in the day, there wasn't, you didn't have all of you guys doing like the incredible work you're doing, where it's like, You know, like you're limited by like old used bookstores in the middle of nowhere, and you know, really shitty 1.0 internet. I remember like reading about the lizard people in the Grand Canyon on some obscure forum. Like, what is this? No way. And now it's like, well, maybe. I mean, like there are a lot of black helicopters going around there. And then like you know, so it's endless and sort of the I think there if I had to boil it down, there's an innate curiosity that some people have where it's like you can hear something, a piece of information, and where it's like, even if I don't believe all of it, I think there's a kernel here, and I want to keep pulling on this thread until I have enough to connect a bunch of random things on a corkboard with, you know, Charlie Day style. And yeah, I don't know how much, you know, like obviously I've listened to your show a lot and I know roughly sort of what your some of your awakening moments were, but you know, then like the health stuff. I remember watching like the Food Inc., another Netflix documentary, and learning how poor the food quality is, and like bringing that to my parents, like, oh, we can only buy organic now. Like, look at this, and they're like, why would we pay more for meat? Like that's silly. And now, like, fast forward, that's the only, like the store they've gone to forever. That's the only thing they sell now. And it's just really funny how, like, you look back on a decade or two and see how much has shifted in our favor. By the way, like, we are, you know, points are on the board for the truther community. That it, you know, it is refreshing and it's exciting and motivating to get this message out there of that, hey, you know, like you know, the water is great. You know, there's plenty of room in the pool. Like, come on in. Like, ask your questions. We don't care. We'll fight it, hash it out a little bit, Union of the Unwanted style, but like, you know, whatever. Um, anything there that you want to jump in on?
Yeah. So obviously Zeitgeist had a huge influence on your worldview. Any other early like documentaries or podcasts or well, maybe podcasts at the time you weren't quite into them quite yet, but maybe or YouTube channels because obviously when a lot of us start going down these rabbit holes, YouTube had very little censorship, and you could find a lot of like, what seemed like homemade documentaries and,
Yeah.
in a basement, and maybe they were poorly put together or the production value sucked, but there's a lot of like interesting, like you said, threads that you could pull on, and you kind of like learn a little fact that you're like, oh, that's interesting. Let me look more into that. And then you look into it, you're like, wow, there's something there. And so who were some of those early, influences on your worldview?
Yeah, I mean, I remember distinctly coming across a David Icke video and sending it to Uncle Jim. Like, have you ever heard of this guy? And I know he had like a proud uncle moment, like showing his friend, like, oh, my nephew just showed me a David Icke video. Like, he couldn't believe it. And because that was like, yeah, YouTube would actually the algorithm would serve you up interesting things. And, you know, depending on what generation of Ike's message at the time, I can't remember exactly, but I'm sure it was like no, I distinctly remember what it was. It was like his one of his love versus fear thesis talks where it's, you know, like how you can boil all of this stuff down to, you know, basically what side of the spectrum are you on of that. And it really, really resonated with me. And so I started finding some of those, you know, there was like this very meandering, winding road between sort of like alternative spirituality and, you know, the truther stuff and, you know, maybe this sort of like innate spiritual power that we have as humans has been squashed for a reason. You know, I had a tough time around that age, just like mentally, emotionally, just like, man, this doesn't feel right. Like I feel like I'm lost here. Like I don't resonate with a lot of what's going on. You know, that sort of like East Coast hustle mentality. I know you're around it a lot too, where it's just like it felt very empty and vapid and man, it just like it kind of sent me into sort of like a depressive spiral. And it's like, what's all this worth? And it was sort of the yeah, how do I put it? Like it would be roughly you'd probably find it in like a new age section of a bookstore, but Way of the Peaceful Warrior, that book by Dan Millman was incredible for me, sort of just like a humorous novel-esque interpretation of sort of like the spiritual path, like from like a don't take yourself too seriously and like life's hard, but you can get over it. And then like Way of the Peace, sorry, Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance was great. And so there was sort of like the spiritual development happening And then obviously, like, listening to a lot of great old records, and the Floyd stuff has always been incredibly influential to me. And so that those like pieces of media were just as influential to me as sort of the YouTube channels that I would then find. And I distinctly remember coming across Edge of Wonder pre-COVID, and it was probably because their production was excellent. They put together some really compelling videos, and they were charismatic dudes, and that's sort of how I found this whole segment of the truther world, was through them, because they had Sam on right after his channel got nuked, the one of the first times, I guess, maybe. And that was right at the beginning of COVID, and I had a lot of time on my hands at that point in my life, and so I started like chasing down the podcast rabbit hole. Like, I never taken it seriously. I was like, oh, oops. That there's, like, obviously it was on the iPods. You plugged it in and something got loaded onto there, but I never like really understood the mechanism of the RSS feed until we went through COVID, and until we saw that the censorship that happened through all of that, which was absolutely insane. And so yeah, it was basically like Edge of Wonder led me to Tinfoil Hat, which led me to Union of the Unwanted. And it's sort of like, it's just incredible that, ultimately, I get to now like work with Charlie, and hang out and talk with you guys, and stuff like that. So it's been a really interesting step-by-step journey of just like pulling on more and more thread, and seeing what unravels throughout it all.
Are those guys still doing
Who
anything?
knows?
Because they were one of the early guests on the Union of the Unwanted,
Yes, they
and
were.
honestly, I almost I'm glad you brought them up because I almost feel guilty saying I forgot about them. But I mean, obviously, with so much content out there and so much going on, constantly, it's hard to keep track of every content creator you like. And sometimes I find myself doing that where you go down some rabbit holes or you get in a rhythm of like, okay, now I'm watching, a bunch of Candace and Dave Smith videos, and then you neglect some other content that you typically watch. So they're one of those content creators that I just haven't really gone back and I guess find out what the hell they're up to, if they're up to anything. But it's funny, there's a lot of content creators that jumped into the world during COVID and then had like a short shelf life. Like they just like
Yeah.
they did it and then they went back to, because I was interviewed on a bunch of shows that I thought were really promising, like shows that people were like, hey, this is, I'm a fan, and I just started podcasting or whatever. I'm like, yeah, I'll come on. And then the host is really interesting and seems to enjoy what he's doing, and then next thing you know, they just stop. And it is hard. It's hard to find time. It's hard to find motivation. It's also hard to, I guess it's like music, and you can probably relate to this. Like, you kind of just have to do it because you enjoy doing it and you enjoy the process. And if you get too caught up in, hey, I've done 10 episodes and nobody's listening, or I've done 20 episodes and no one's listening, and it's taking up all this time booking people, recording, editing, and I have all these other life priorities, it's like, then maybe it's not for you. And it's same thing with music. Like, you kind of have to, you got to enjoy it and you got to love it, and you have to do it even if it's not financially rewarding. It maybe I guess, especially in the early days, it's does the negative. You spend all this money on, like you mentioned pedals. It's funny because you're bringing up some things that are sparking some memories of like, spending, trying to earn some money as a kid to like buy, a distortion pedal, a flange
Yep.
pedal, this pedal, or whatever badass pedal you want. Or I think I got one right here, yeah, the Boss, I don't know, old Boss ME50 or whatever,
Hmm.
and just like trying to customize your own sounds and stuff. And it's like,
Uh-huh.
you're spending all this money. You're like, I'm never probably going to make money playing music, but I am just fucking enjoying it. I'm enjoying being creative and whatnot. So that is a problem with our society is we don't, and I think Rogan said it, and I keep quoting it. So I'm pretty sure it was him who said it. He's like, find that thing that somebody else considers work, and that's your thing, right? And it's like, that is so true. Like, I don't enjoy working on cars, but all my buddies that are mechanics, they work on cars as a hobby and they do it as a job. Like, you have to love doing it, for you to do it all day at work and then still do it on your, on your spare time. Like that's their thing, right? And the world needs a little bit of everything, all different types of people, because everybody has their thing. And, I have friends of mine who love math. I hate math. Like I could never be a CPA or anything like that and just look at numbers every day. But some of my best friends, that's their thing. They love just going through, doing the math, going through the data and whatnot. And I'm just like, I couldn't do it. I would, I'd be self-medicating with alcohol or something. And so that's, I think, a we were talking about, like, black pill or whatnot. Like that's one of the few things that kind of keeps me hoping, is that if we can, I don't know, the world's changing and it's changing quickly, and I think it's resetting, I guess, for lack of a better term. Like things are resetting and we're evolving into something, and a new economy is emerging with like AI and like computers and like all this conversation about universal basic income, and how we just can't sustain the world that we've kind of created. But I am hopeful, because I think maybe it will spark the conversation of like, hey, if everybody, gets enough money to survive, and then maybe everybody can just pursue what they love and then find a way of doing that, and kind of not being depressed and unhappy or whatnot. And so I mean, yeah, that's kind of, and that's where like Zeitgeist kind of gave you that message also. You had the first one, which kind of what I think really it's been a while since I watched them, but like the
Yeah,
first
me
one
too.
really focused on just propaganda, the history of propaganda, how they use propaganda to control people, everything from 9/11 to religion and all these other things, which again, like it wasn't so much I don't think it was like he was making the point that he was anti-religion. I think it was more about the idea of like, hey, people will use these things to control you. That was kind of more, because then you
Yes.
look at like the rest of the documentary, that was kind of the common thread, was like, hey, these are all ways of control. And then you had
Yes.
the second one, which was Zeitgeist Addendum, which was about just basically the Federal Reserve and how banks make money out of nothing, and how the whole system's basically rigged to screw you. And then you had Moving Forward, which was the third one, which was this optimistic way of looking at things. Like, yeah, we have all these negative things going on in the world, but if we learn that we're being tricked and we can snap out of it, we can redesign something better.
Dude, you touched on so many beautiful things there. And I was taking some notes as we went because, all of those concepts fit together so beautifully. And yeah, I don't even think I've seen the second or third Zeitgeist. I mean, obviously, there was a segment in the first one about the Federal Reserve where that was just enough of a tease where it's like, oh man, this system is this is a house of cards here. But again, we'll just like work backwards a little bit. The solution series of activist posts, which I helped Charlie with, is it's meant to sort of touch on that exact feeling that you just shared, where it's like, yes, we're surrounded by negativity, and we see it in our world all the time, where it's it can eat you alive the same way that CNN or Fox News eats somebody else alive. It's just like you need to have an outlet for it. Yes, you can surround yourself with all this information, and I find myself guilty of this too. Sometimes I'll just like get into the habit of throwing on a show in the background because I'm just naturally curious and I want to learn. There's so much good content out there that I'm just kind of like, yeah, put it on and let's see what resonates. um but in order to find a way of sort of like alchemicalizing, like a, transmuting that sort of fear and knowledge into something beautiful, into something that can coalesce into a beautiful world for everybody. Like that's, and this is something that I've always resonated so much with your perspective on Union of the Unwanted and things like that, where, you have these sort of like, bare knuckle boxing matches sometimes with some of these more divisive topics of like the UBI and all that, like, and I remember from an early age thinking like, when the robots take over, that's going to be great. Like, cause I'll just be able to work on, music or whatever. And like that'll be so fun, man. And then, but it wasn't until like later, probably like early 20s where I realized like, oh man, like not everybody has this creative muscle. Like they've let the creative muscle atrophy. Like I think that sort of ties in an earlier point that we were talking about where like the kids in school, it gets less and less kids consider themselves creative as they grow up. because it is a muscle, it's, if you don't use your brain, that atrophies. If you don't, if you don't start curling things, your biceps atrophy, all that sort of thing. Like, there is so much a similarity between all of these topics. And, I've got a lot of problems with the school system, but, that to me is the core of it all, where it's, no one's taught how to find the thing that they love. No one, even back in the day, I'm sure your generation, like, I don't know if you had a shop class or anything like that. I mean, I remember we had it one semester, one quarter of like 1 year where we kind of learned how to use some of the power tools and all that. And like that was cool. We never worked on cars or anything. And, I would love to get to that point where I could do some of that, not even just from like a prepper's perspective, but just because I like how things fit together. That's the Zen and the art of motorcycle maintenance perspective. Like there's quality, capital Q quality in some of these concepts where it's like, there is art in how an engine works. And, so if you're friends who are mechanics and love doing that, I don't think that they're necessarily like fixing someone's muffler for fun, but they're working on like a muscle car or something. Like they have a hobby car that they're working on. And that was something there, that's a unique distinction that I had to learn sort of the hard way with my musical journey because like, I was doing audio professionally as like my full-time job for a while. And then there was a breaking point where I'd gotten contracted to help produce a song for one of those shitty Hallmark Christmas movies one year. And I got like paid really, really well for it. Man, like this is awesome when it first landed on my lap. And then by the time I was done making a Christmas song in the middle of July, it's like, oh man, I don't want to do music forever again. Like this is awful. Like I'm so burnt out. And so that's sort of when I started transitioning more into the video world. It was because I learned how important it was to have sort of like you have your creative gas tank to mix all of these metaphors together. And if you deplete that with your job, and that's like then that feels even almost more empty than just doing like spreadsheets forever in some way where it's like, man, I took this beautiful loving thing that's full of light, this artistic endeavor of mine, and then I monetized it, and then I'd had a bad day at work, and like now I just like that's the thing that I loved. Like, what do I do to reset now? And so it became this important thing in my life of like, how do I, balance these scales of like, how can I do something creative that I can enjoy and feeling fulfilled doing so? That's like my quote unquote job, and that I would do for fun no matter what, but like still leaving enough energy in the tank to do something for play too. And that's sort of why I've stopped making my metric for music like the amount of stuff that I release. I've played in a lot of bands and I've played, done a lot of my solo stuff where, I've played shows and it sort of there were metrics for success in the music world, right? And, like, are you playing to bigger rooms? Are you playing, are you getting all your plays and your views on social media? And it's like, it's exhausting. And like, man, that's kind of defeats the purpose of it for me. Like I love being able to pick up a guitar when I'm in the middle of like a thought for something else and then just messing around with a chord change and like, oh man, like I don't know where that came from. I love that. And like, let me just, save that for later, put it aside. And, to me, that's like the flow state thing because another thing I want to touch on, because like, when you were in the middle of something, you were working and you pick up the guitar and then you look at the clock again and it's been like 2 hours and you're like, oh, fuck. Like I had so much to do, but I'm so glad that I just spent those 2 hours doing that thing that I love because I feel so much better now. And I kind of have this new, energy in it to go back into my day, quote unquote, like, and then just sort of like hit the ground running again. And so, and that's the same thing with like working out or anything like that, where it's like sometimes you just need to, there was in my entrepreneurial course of study, there was one professor I had where he had a great line where it's like you can't think outside of the box if you're sitting in the same box. And sometimes you need to actually get yourself out of this little box, whether it's the box around your desk or around your apartment or around your home, or just get out of it. And it's amazing what sort of thoughts start coming in, the creative energy that you can start channeling once you change up your surroundings or take a different way home from work or do anything to just change up your world a little bit. And I think the universe responds to that.
Yeah, I'm a big believer of that. I think we get stuck in patterns and ways of looking at the world, ways of thinking, ways of just living. And then sometimes you just need like just be thrown a curveball or sometimes it would happen when, especially when I was doing music a lot and I was trying to be creative or whatnot, like it would happen late at night. I'd be on my way home from going out with the guys or going on a date or whatever. And I had a couple drinks in me and I'm kind of like, you're kind of just exhausted from the night, and you're just playing music and all of a sudden, like, that song like hits you in a way that it never hit you because you're actually paying attention, you're not distracted, and or you're in some emotional state, either emotional high or low or whatever it may be. Maybe you're lonely on your way home and you're thinking about like, what the fuck am I doing? Or whatever it may be, what
Hmm.
state of mind. But it was just a moment that like got me to feel or think about things slightly different. And then, these ideas would come to you, or you just look at whatever journey or road you're going down differently. And we all need that. We all need to once in a while just like throw that curveball, like you said. Maybe it's doing mushrooms, maybe it's doing something that alters your way of thinking, or exercise or traveling or trying something new and different that might be difficult. Like all these things can help, because if not, I think we are sometimes a victim of constantly, I forget which comedian said it, but it's like constantly going to www.youagreewithme.com. Like that's
Hmm.
where, most people will spend their time. Will just like in this echo chamber. And then you just never get a different perspective. You never get a different outlook. You never get, any of those things. So yeah, I'm a big believer of that. I think it's crucial, not just for artistic reasons, but just for being a human and for self-reflecting and trying to be honest about why you do or don't believe things or think things. Um, so you obviously had like we probably had very similar influences, like the David Icke's design guys, in regards to like worldviews and kind of like sparking thought and looking at the world slightly different. But was there any musicians or any artists that were talking about social issues or political issues that you were into?
Yeah, man. So I briefly mentioned Pink Floyd earlier, and that's sort of been the that was the first artist that really spoke to me on that sort of deeper level. And obviously it was sort of in the context of sort of the how do I put it, more of like the isolation element that I was feeling at the time, where, the world can be really dark and, it can feel really cynical at times, but there was something really beautiful about the way they positioned it. And sort of the emotional roller coaster ride of life and those highs and the lows, and you go back through their discography, and for me it was the Wish You Were Here album was one of the first albums that I just absolutely fell in love with start to finish, and specifically the title track and the story behind it of Sid Barrett, and the way he kind of started slipping away in front of the band's eyes, and how that led to the song. um and I think I was in third or fourth grade. I did like a project on that song, and talking about acid to my teacher. She's like, Who are you? What's going on?" And but it was just such like a powerful song to me that I actually started doing research into the background of the song, like trying to understand like what are these guys trying to say with this. And then it led me to Animals, their '77 album, which is just mind blowing to me. Because that was, the album I needed at that time. And it's just, I go on all day with that stuff. But, there were, that was sort of like the rock and roll, like the classic rock stuff I grew up with. That was sort of the off ramp for that. And my parents both had great music tastes in their own different way. My dad was more of the classic rock stuff. My mom loved it, but also had the Earth, Wind, and Fire, the soul, the funk element, the Michael, the good, the really good poppy stuff from that era too. And and then I remember finding or being exposed to Thievery Corporation when I was in sixth grade, maybe, and that kind of changed my life. Like, oh man, I didn't know music could sound like this. Like the world music influence, the bossa nova, like the really cool percussion, the textures, and like I think that was the moment I realized like I wanted to make music and make it in the way that I wanted, that I heard in my head. And it's taken like 15, 20 years to get to that point where I'm like finally getting the stuff out that I hear in my head in a way that feels authentic to me, which is a beautiful thing. But, it became this, insatiable, the sort of the same way I'm insatiable for, information, I was insatiable for music and just always trying to chase down different rabbit holes of genres and oh, this subgenre of electronic music and that subgenre of hard rock and like I went through like my like emo metal phase, the hard stuff, like the real heavy stuff where it's like, okay, this feels different when it's played loud, like there's you can't just like listen to that like softly in the background, like and there's this fantastic book. I don't know if you've ever read it called How Music Works by David Byrne. He's the Talking Heads guy, the front man, and man, I can't recommend that enough for you specifically, Ricky. But it's sort of an analysis of how music has developed over different cultures over time, and how monks and started those chants that monks did were a direct result of the cathedrals that they were performing them in, and the way classical music was performed was because of these massive concert halls they were performed in, and how hard rock is basically a child of like the small grungy clubs that they were performed in and the basements and the garages and stuff like and it's hard to take that art form out of the venue that it's meant to be enjoyed in and still embrace it. It's and I can get I can go on the topic of that forever, but it's as I've grown up and have found myself in these different situations, it starts to make a lot more sense where these people were coming from with their art and what they were trying to communicate. And create. So that's kind of how I learned. Like creativity is such a product of your environment and sort of the creative limitations that you put on yourselves. Like the punk rock scene, like those gross little clubs that they were performed in, like that was a beautiful limitation for it. Shit had to be played loud and fast, and it spawned such a cool movement out of it that people define their entire identity around that sort of thing. And then getting into the electronic stuff and the dubstep, like the heavy, real heavy, electronic music, and then the more beautiful, like melodically inspired stuff. Like it all has a place, and it might not always have a place in my life in every year, but it's really interesting to kind of reflect on it and see how that journey has evolved and sort of led me to different places and meet different people and all of that, all just be kind of because of like the music or the art that we were enjoying together at the time. So I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does absolutely. What heavy stuff did you listen to besides Floyd? Did you listen to any like newer stuff that was political? I mean, just to I guess throw some names out there, bands that I kind of grew up listening to. Even though now looking back, I'm like I'm not sure now I would listen to them just because I would disagree with them so heavily. But there was a band called Amen, which was what was the singer's name? He was kind of known. He was in a bunch of like punk and bands, very outspoken, and his stuff was very. They had one song called "Coma America," which was I think their biggest hit. But that was a band, 1 Minute Silence, which I always
Is that
call.
Casey Chaos, that
Yeah.
guy?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. Casey Chaos. Yeah. 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 He was in another popular band too. But 1 Minute Silence, I always called them the Irish Rage Against the Machine. That was before.
Rage on
A lot of
behalf of the machine
yeah,
now. Yeah.
exactly. Yeah. That was when I still liked Rage, and that was a
Yep.
compliment. But yeah, 1 Minute Silence was awesome. They're another band that was very politically motivated, and their music was very interesting and talked about historical stuff and social issues and whatnot. I had the singer Yap, Barry, his nickname was Yap, Barry Yap. I forget what his last name is, but he was super interesting. Actually, didn't even know until he came on the show that he had Asperger's. Like his agent or whoever was helping me book the show told me, and they're like, oh, so like we got to keep it, a minimum of I forget how long or whatever, and
Hmm.
that like they were like worried about him, being on the call for too long, and that's why he didn't do any like really long form interviews. But one of the smartest guys I've ever had on, like just so fascinating, his interest in philosophy and so many other things in history and then Burton C. Bell from Fear Factory, I remember talking to him about 1 Minute Silence, and he had the same type of experience that when they toured with him, he's like, dude, he was such a fascinating guy. But those were kind of, and then Fear Factor with like the man versus machine, kind of, transhumanism topic, they were really influential because they were, I was it was in like the 90s where they were putting out these albums and really way ahead of the curve in regards to like just the man versus machine idea and conversation and themes. And so it was them, 1 minute songs. And then like in rap, you had, of course, you had Low Key, you had Immortal Techniques, you had I'm trying to think. There's it's a few other ones that were really influential.
Aesop Rock was a big one for me in the hip hop world, and Atmosphere, the Rhyme Sayers stuff was great. And yeah, like for me, Mushroom Head, Slipknot, Disturbed, Rise Against, like that was when I was like angry and young and just like it needed to come out, and like it was so cool. Are you familiar with the band Havoc at all?
Hmm. I feel like I've heard the name. Are they like a new metal band or what are
I don't know what exact genre they describe themselves as, but th their frontman David Sanchez, he's a good friend of mine. He's out here. He would be a fantastic guest for you to have on. I'll introduce you guys. He's been on Charlie's show a bunch, and I was playing in a band with his younger brother, Steve. Shout out Sanchez family. But they are very much like-minded like us, and it seemed like that somehow that genre specifically, and I don't know if it's sort of the the challenge it is to sort of understand what they're saying in the recordings and especially live, like you have to kind of peel back that layer of just the raw emotion of the music to hear what or read what they're saying and understand it and sort of internalize it. Like it does seem like there is a disproportionate amount of that music is very activist and awake and being able to sort of communicate these higher level ideas and the Asperger's thing is speaking of David Byrne, like I believe he says in that book that he was suffering from it. And, you watch him on stage and like the Stop Making Sense film and the way he's dancing, wearing the big suit, you're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. And, John Mayer will say that about, so there's a way, there's sort of almost a superpower in, in and of itself with that sort of thing being on those spectrums of, and whatever label doctors want to put on it, and whether it's like the ADD thing or this or that, it's a way of sort of putting people in a box that don't want to go in the box willingly, you know?
It's funny you say it's a superpower because I just heard Whitney Cummings on Rogan's podcast, and she literally, that's how she explained it. She's like, she feels like the meds are the system trying to suppress our superpowers. They're like, oh, you have ADHD, you have a lot of energy, and you can want to go out and do stuff. And no, no, how about we just make you a zombie and here's a pill, right? And
Mhm.
yeah, so it's funny. It's an interesting and actually accurate way of looking at it because it really is what you're doing. You're turning all these unique things about people. You're looking at it like it's a bad thing, and you make everybody feel like they're just something's wrong with you for being different, and everybody should be exactly the same in a cookie cutter uh, world perspective and whatnot. And another band I don't want to forget because we brought up Zeitgeist, and they're from the UK, and they did a lot of the Zeitgeist music festivals. Was Enter Shikari, Rao Reynolds. They're from the UK. Their early stuff was really interesting. When I had them on, their stuff, it was a lot less poppy. It was a mixture of like post-hardcore, metalcore, electronic music, dubstep, punk. It was really interesting, and it was really like just a unique blend of so many different genres. And one of those
Huh.
bands that like from album to album or from song to song, like you get a whole completely different vibe. So it wouldn't be one of those albums that you listen to in the background and you don't even know what track you're on. Like it would be
Huh.
like you would know each track was like drastically different. It'd be a song that had more electronic elements than a song that was more poppy, and then a song that is more metalcore and or punk and faster. And but the singer, really interesting guy, and he was a big influence on their music was the Zeitgeist movement, and they got to know Peter Joseph and did a bunch of shows with them. I actually think that's how I got hooked up with them. Was I had somebody from the Zeitgeist movement on. I think his name was Ben McLeish from the UK, and then he was helping like put together the festivals. I'm like, hey, can you hook me up with Rao Reynolds from Enter Shikari? I'm a big fan, and so that's how I think I got him on. But yeah, they influence a lot of people. You don't see quite as much political music now. I mean, you have the Architects from the UK, and they're really interesting. But again, it's like you don't see any like I don't have a team political music. It's always like it's either like right wing music or left wing music. There's like no just truther music. Like, are you aware of any? Like any just like true like, hey, I'm just gonna like I'm not trying to defend whatever tribe I'm a part of. I'm just kind of putting out thought-provoking music.
Yeah, I mean that's a great point. I would say Havoc probably fits into that, but it's I would say that the music industry has sort of this behemoth, machine of an industry is sort of what determines what we see. It's what determines what the Spotify algorithm serves up for you or anything else. There's no go to the record store and start digging through crates for most people anymore. There's very little like, oh, we're just sitting in a car together and listening to this random college station at, 2 a.m. and like, oh, what's this? Sort of moment that people have. And so it's hard to find it. You have to kind of have that cool friend that shows it to you. And so I think this kind of ties back into what we were talking a little bit about earlier, like in order, for people like us who are politically homeless, the music industry, like there's no reason for them to sort of, hire us, we'll put the, abilities aside for now. Like it forces us to sort of like develop it on our own. It's sort of the parallel, community element of it where I'm just gonna get a little shitty mixer and a two-channel interface and my first little microphone and start making shitty music and see what comes out of it. Like I don't need a label. I don't need any of this stuff. Like I'm just gonna make music for the love of making music. And then if you're sort of technically inclined or at least technically curious, you start fiddling around with your pedal board for, hours on end and like, oh man, that's really cool. If I start moving, changing the order of my fuzz into my reverb and this sort of thing, you like for me, that part of the process is almost as important as the other part where like I love just messing with my camera rig and like rebalancing things on that front. Like let me just play with it, like this Lego aspect of it, the way I'm sure that your mechanic friends love playing with an engine. Like, that's how you tune a car. And so to me, like there is that sort of do it yourself mentality where it almost doesn't matter who hears it. Because that's not the point. The people who are meant to hear it will hear it. It'll find them. They'll find it somehow. That doesn't get us any money or recognition or or anything like that. But that's, no one gets into these industries for the money, as I'm sure you know with the podcasting world and coming from the music world. It's all, it's a labor of love. It's because we will die if we don't get it out somehow, like, or at least part of us will die. And I think that if I had to speculate with, the problem of the world, one of the many is just it stems from people just like having all this toxic sludge building up inside of them that they're unable to get out. And they almost have to start becoming and identifying with that toxic sludge inside of themselves in order to be okay with it. And, so if the robots took over, I think it kind of lost my way on that point earlier, like I'm realizing that most of the people in the world won't just have a thing that they can do and love it. A lot of people just drink themselves to death, and that's a scary thing. Like, and that's where I can totally see the people's argument with the dangers of UBI and all that stuff. Obviously, there's the technical, corporate, it's whatever. Like there's so many elements of it that are dangerous, but to me, like it's sort of the spiritual component of it all that's like the most fascinating, that undertone to it all, where like what would you do if money didn't matter? And so whether or not the money matters, you should still just do that thing. You'll figure out a way of monetizing. That's why I love entrepreneurship. That's why I love doing all of these things where you can just you there's a phrase that keeps coming up in the world. It's like you can just do things. And I love that. I love that mentality. It's like you don't need to ask for permission. You don't need to like ask the record label if I can just record shitty music with my two-channel Scarlett interface. Like you can just do it. You can just reach out to your favorite podcasters and ask them if they want to grab lunch and start working with them. You can just ask, like, you can just do things. And that's the kind of the message that I want to impart to people. Like you are creative. You just haven't found your medium yet. And that's a big part of what I think my mission on this earth is, this life, is just to help people figure out what their medium is and encourage them to do it, because anything is creative if you do it the right way.
No, you're right. Absolutely. And that's such a great question to ask people, or for maybe for listeners to ask themselves. What would you do if money didn't matter? Like where would you spend your energy and time? And what would bring you some type of satisfaction or fulfillment if money wasn't the motivator, right? And these are questions. That's why it's funny because you talk about the East Coast hustle mentality. It's so true. And so many times I'm around these guys that I feel so worthless because I'm like, fuck, man, if I only look at the world like them, where I could find purpose in literally nothing else besides just making more ones and zeros, I'm
Hmm.
like, I would be much better off financially and I wouldn't be struggling and I wouldn't be, worried about paying bills and I wouldn't be, and it's like, I just can't do it. I just can't, like, these things just don't interest me. Like, just making money is not a interest of mine. It's just something that, like, money seems to be, at least for myself, like, it's always been just like something that gets in the way of all the things I actually want to do. And, growing up, not the woe is me or anything like that, but I was born in a house with no running water. When we came to America, my parents as immigrants, making or saving money was the same as making money. They didn't make a lot, but they knew the only way they could get ahead if they save a lot. So like every conversation at home was always like, how could we save money? And do we really need to spend money on this? Or do we really need to spend money on that? Or whatever. So it was like I think it like scarred me to some extent where I'm just like, fuck, man, like there's way more. I wanted to do creative things, and all my mother wanted me to talk about was like, hey, why are you playing basketball or soccer and jeopardizing getting hurt? And then you can't go to work. Or why are you spending money on cleats? You don't play professionally. Like, like save your money. It's like and it was just like, oh my God, mom, you don't get it. Like there's more than just, and then, but it was that like poor mentality where it was like, you're always so concerned about having enough and struggling that her concern for struggling financially prevented her from doing anything just for pleasure and also prevented her from understanding why I would do anything just for
Right.
pleasure. And it became this. So I think, not to call it trauma, I don't know what else to call it, but I think that type of financial trauma of like always like all my negative interactions with my parents were always about money and they were always stressing about it. And they're always, so it's like I related and linked this feeling of negativity with money. And then all I like, I'm like, once I'm old enough, I'm like, I never want to fucking think about it. I just want
Right.
to, I want to just pay my bills. And then once it's done, I don't want to think about how to make more of it. I don't want to think about it. I just want to like make enough to survive and be happy. I'm like, that's it. Cause I'll be happy doing
Totally.
everything else. And it's not, again, like, it's not the best way of thinking when you're constantly around like hustlers and you're like, dude, this dude just bought a brand new truck, or this dude's business is growing like crazy. But then you find out like, oh, they just got divorced, or their kids hate them, or so it's like, you know what? Maybe I did pick the right journey and world way of living my life.
Yeah, dude, you nailed it. And I've had to sort of boil this down to sort of like, what are you optimizing for in your life? There's this life design movement that I find fascinating. I think it can become its own obsession, in an unhealthy way, where it's like, oh, I only read my emails from 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. and don't bother me like that. That's kind of taking it a little too far for me. But there is sort of like, are you optimizing for money? And in which case, great, make more money. If that's the thing that will make you happy, fine. Maybe for us, like I don't, it's not an interest for me either. It's a means to an end, and maybe that's why I'm bad at keeping it or saving it or anything, because like I love, to me it's a tool, it's a mechanism of energy where I can bring happiness to myself and others through buying experiences and creative outlets and a different, lens that can get me this cool different shot, or a different pedal that can get me this different sound, or something to make my studio sound better, or a case to bring something from one. But like that's what money is for me. It's a way of, it's that sort of an energetic currency, and nothing more, nothing less. And I'm grateful that it's worked, and there's that sort of spiritual undertone, biblical undertone to it all, where it's like, don't worry about it. Like it's all going to work out. God will provide whatever, however, people land on that side of the spectrum. But like it's been true in my world, like it's, I've always had good organic food to eat. I've always had a roof over my head. Like after that, it's hard for me personally to get too stressed about it. And that's not financial advice, but it seems to work for me sort of. And I'm leading a life that I've optimized for something different other than money. And that's up to the listeners to figure out what that means for in their life. And And I know you have a hard stop, and I know we could go on forever, but
We barely scratched the surface. Maybe we
s-
should make this a part one and make it a part two because I feel like there's so many things that we could start talking about that could easily fill another hour.
I'd love that.
Even, it's actually because I have to go coach my daughter. Speaking of things that don't pay well but are very fulfilling, I have to go coach my daughter's basketball team, then my son's basketball team right after hers. Then I'm coming right back because we have a union of Don't Want It tonight. If you want to join them,
I'd
join us.
love
Let
to.
me know.
I'd love
I'll
to.
send. Okay, great. Yeah, I'll send you the link, and then we could do more talking with the rest of the group, and you can join us on our Union of the Wanted kickoff show of 2026, and
Perfect.
get that going. But Jeff, thank you so much for joining me. Let's reschedule part two very soon. I'll send you the calendar link, and we'll get that going, and schedule that, and then also I'll send you the Zoom link at the same time. And but for people listening who want to keep up with all the projects you're involved in and what social medias you might be on and where can they keep up with you?
Yeah, the best place to get in touch with me directly is Empath Eyes Studio, and I'm sure all the links will be in the show notes and all that. But Empath, Empath, Eyes, Eyes Studio. That'll be my handle on social media. It's empathizedstudio.com. That's the best place to find me. But follow along with the stuff we're doing with Activist Post. Charlie Robinson and I, helping him with all of the email newsletters and stuff. So go and sign up for the email newsletter, Activist Post. That's a great place to kind of hear my musings on a week by week basis for how to fix this crazy world we live in. So yeah, but Ricky, I'm so grateful for the time, man. I've been looking forward to this, so I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, it was my pleasure. I mean, I love having like-minded people on, and especially people who come from a music background and artistic background. I feel like there's a lot of times that, I have people like yourself on, and I'm like, wow, I'm like, me and this person, we would be friends if we lived near each other. We'd be hanging out, probably talking about the same things.
Couldn't.
So yeah, that's always awesome. But yeah, I'll send you the links to the calendar to the Union of Rwanda tonight, and then also we'll have to definitely talk again, and then send me any links you might want in the show description, anything specific. Send them to me. I'll make sure to put them there. And thanks a lot, Jeff. I will hopefully see you in a couple hours.
Perfect, dude. Thank you so much. Take care.
Take care.